Been an assistant medical examiner for 12 years.
And are you a licensed physician?
I am.
And do you have a particular specialty that's associated with the work that you do?
I do. I have a specialty in forensic pathology.
What's your educational background?
Beginning in medical school, I graduated from the University of Arizona College of Medicine in 2002. That included a year as a post-sophomore research fellow in pathology. I then proceeded to the University of California at San Francisco, where I completed a pathology residency there that included a surgical pathology fellowship and a year as a clinical instructor at San Francisco General Hospital. Upon that completion in 2008, I went to the University of New Mexico in the Office of the Medical Examiner in Albuquerque and completed a year as a forensic pathology fellow. And upon completion of that in 2009, I came to Minnesota and I've practiced here ever since.
Do you have any board certifications?
I do.
And describe those for the jury, please.
Yes, I am board certified in anatomic pathology and forensic pathology.
And are you up to date with all of the requirements for being board certified?
I am.
Getting back to your role as an assistant Hennepin County medical examiner, could you describe for the jury what your job duties are?
My job duties revolve around establishing cause and manner of death and medical legal death investigation, particularly in cases of unnatural, unexpected, or violent deaths.
And does that include some investigation as well as some physical exams?
Yes, it includes quite a number of things. Investigation, autopsies. We do a bunch of outreach activities in terms of education, but again, primarily it revolves around identification of remains and establishing cause and manner of death.
And is the purpose of an autopsy to establish cause and manner of death?
That's one of the major goals, yes.
Could you describe for the jury the method and procedure that you follow generally when it comes to the autopsy process?
The autopsy itself or the whole approach?
The approach.
So the approach starts with information gathering. We have medical investigators that work for us that collect information pertaining to an individual's medical history, events that may have unfolded that pertain or might impact the cause and manner of death, the interpretation of that. Meaning we'll get reports from first responders or from law enforcement agents or from next of kin or other witnesses, and we'll collect that information as we proceed. Once we get that information, or as we collect that information, we'll proceed on to the autopsy portion, which is an examination that is external and then internal. And I can detail those if that's what you're asking for.
Sure. You mentioned that there's an autopsy process that involves an external and an internal exam. Is there also toxicological components of that as well?
Yes. So the external portion of our examination includes viewing the body in an as-is state, noting any kind of clothing or medical interventions that might be present on the body, collecting hair and fingernails depending on the type of case, and also performing x-rays depending on the type of case, potentially to look for injuries or retained projectiles that might be present. Once we complete that portion of the as-is examination, we will remove the medical interventions, survey the body again looking for injury or natural disease, take photographs as we go to document any findings. Once we complete that portion, we will clean the body, repeat the examination, again scrutinizing for any forms of injury whatsoever or a natural disease, things that might help us determine cause and manner of death. And that is the external portion of the exam. Upon completion of that, we'll proceed to the internal portion of the exam, which is more what people think of when they think of autopsies. So we will examine the tissues of the body from head to toe internally. We'll go organ by organ, looking for injury, evidence of disease, or other findings. We will collect tissues for microscopic work. We'll collect tissues for potential toxicology studies. Sometimes we will perform, depending on the case, specialty examinations, looking at dissecting the wrists or the back or the neck, looking for injuries that might be hard to see externally.
And you indicated that you documented this process with photographs as you go?
Yes, all the way through the process.
And then do you ultimately draft a report as well?
That is our goal.
And are there certain types of cases within your office that go through a secondary review process with another pathologist?
Yes, all children under 6 and all homicides are reviewed by a second pathologist.
And throughout the course of your career, approximately how many autopsies have you conducted?
I conducted myself over 1,800 autopsies, and I've assisted or trained other individuals on hundreds more.
Dr. Jackson, I'm going to direct your attention to April 11th of this year. Did you respond to a scene with respect to a death investigation on that date?
I did.
And how did you come to be involved in that case?
So yes, that was a weekend. It was a Sunday, and I was en route to home after work, and I was the doctor on call. And it happened that sometime after about 5 o'clock, I received a call from one of our investigators that there had been an officer-involved shooting in one of our areas that we cover. An officer-involved shooting is the type of case where a doctor does respond with the medical investigator. So we arranged a meeting point and carpooled to the scene. And when we got there, we met up with one of the investigators from the BCA who had jurisdiction in the case.
So where approximately did you respond?
The site was in Brooklyn Center, and it was on 63rd Avenue North, I believe, at the corner of Catherine Drive.
And you indicated that you responded with someone else from your office. Who was that?
That was Stephanie Erickson, one of our investigators.
And approximately what time of day was it when you arrived on scene?
So we got the call after 5. The placard, which we fill out when we arrive at the site of the body, was the time on that was 6:11 p.m., I believe.
And you indicated that photos are typically taken by your office. Does that include also photos of your arrival on scene and observations on scene?
Yes, part of our field examination includes photography of the scenes of the body and things around the body.
In addition to the photographs during the autopsy process?
Correct, and separate from.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would offer exhibits 99, 102, 103, 105, 107, 108, 110, 114, 116, 118, 119 through 125, 127, 141, 143, 145, 146 for demonstrative purposes, 147 through 149, 152, 155, 157, 158, and 160.
Is there any objection to those exhibits?
Objections were noted.
Yes, okay. And I ruled on those objections. Those exhibits will be admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I'm going to read the instruction on demonstrative evidence. The state is about to introduce a computer-generated animation. This does not serve as proof of any facts in itself. It is presented only to aid your understanding of a witness's testimony or other evidence here in court. If the animation is not consistent with your evaluation of the testimony or other evidence, you should disregard the animation and determine the facts from the underlying testimony or other evidence.
Thank you, Your Honor. And just to be clear for the record, all of the exhibits are offered substantively with the exception of 146, which is offered for demonstrative purposes. At this time, I would ask that we put Exhibit 99 on screen, please. All right, Dr. Jackson, do you see a photograph in front of you?
I do.
And looking at that photograph, could you describe what you observed when you arrived on scene on April 11th?
Yes, we came in from the west. This is a view looking east, and what we see here as we approach the scene were 2 damaged vehicles some debris in the middle of the roadway, a number of squad cars. Off in the distance, there are police tape markers there. We did notice media present and a large crowd gathered beyond the barrier.
And then if we could put Exhibit 102 on the screen, please. You described observing vehicles. Was there also a tent location that was set up behind one of those vehicles?
Yes, adjacent to this white vehicle, which was reportedly the decedent's vehicle, is a greenish colored tent that was erected over the body for privacy purposes.
And did you ultimately enter the tent?
We did.
And what information did you have at that time when you arrived on scene and went into the tent to look at the body?
We were briefed by a special agent from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and got a little bit more information, namely that a short distance down the road from here, the decedent had been pulled over at a traffic stop and was injured, shot, and managed to drive his vehicle a short distance, and it crashed here at this point where you see it. The individual was unresponsive in the car, removed from the car by law enforcement, if I recall, and pulled a short distance to the grassy yard where the tent was erected over him sometime later.
And did you learn the identity of the individual who had passed away?
We had a tentative identity of Daunte Wright.
And was that identity later confirmed?
It was later by fingerprints.
If we could put Exhibit 103 on the screen, please. You indicated that you entered the tent. What was the condition of Daunte Wright's body at that time?
This is the view we saw, less the placard that we put on the body, but the body was lying in the grass, covered by a sheet, as depicted here. We could see some clothing emerging from the sheet, and there were some medical interventions and other wrappers on the ground.
If we could put Exhibit 105 on the screen, please. Could you describe what you did after observing the body with the sheet?
Yes, after this is the field examination portion of our work, and we removed the sheet, exposed the body as you see it here. Again, looking at different medical interventions that are present, the clothing that is somewhat disturbed, likely due to medical intervention, the process of medical intervention there. And we've placed our placard with pertinent information known at the time over the body for this identification photo.
And then you indicated that the placard had a time. Is that the 1811 that's noted there?
Yes.
And would that be 6:11 p.m.?
Correct.
And the ME staff noted there, S. Erickson. Is that Stephanie Erickson from your office?
That is correct.
Could we put Exhibit 107 on the screen, please? Did you make some closer observations of the body on the scene?
Yes, we did. We've taken a number of photos. This particular photo is a close-up of the left side of the decedent's body, and what's depicted here are a number of medical interventions. The one centered in the photo is a clear adhesive patch in occlusive dressing that's placed over a gunshot wound. There's some dark discoloration that you can see there in this image, and that is dried blood, essentially.
And after observing the body on scene, what did you do next? If we could put up Exhibit 108 so you could describe.
So after we complete our field examination, which entails, again, looking at the body and the items surrounding it and on it, we'll gently roll the body and examine the back, again, searching for potential injury. Once we have completed our field exam, we will bag the hands, which means putting paper bags over the hands to potentially preserve any trace evidence that might be there. Then we'll carefully put the body in a body pouch and seal it with a zip-locking tag, which is pictured here. This is the yellow tag going through the zipper pulls, and that's labeled with the decedent's medical, or the decedent's ME number, which we've established, the date and time of the bag seal, and initialed by the witnesses.
And when you describe the date and time of this seal and initialed by the witnesses, is this here that seal that you're describing?
Yes, it is.
And it indicates 4/11/21/1835. Would that be 6:35 p.m.?
Yes.
And what does that time indicate?
That is the time that I filled out that bag tag and sealed it on the pouch.
So would that have been the approximate time you had bagged the body?
Yes, directly. It would be 1 minute before that we put the body in the bag.
And then the initials noted there, whose initials are those?
Those are Stephanie Erickson, the investigator, and LJ, my initials.
And after you sealed up the body, what was done with the body?
So in the field, this is a picture of the bag as we saw it the following morning, but after we seal the bag in the field, the body is transported to our office, and we have a transport company that actually effected this move, and they arrived shortly after we did at the scene.
And was it the next day, on April 12th, when you began the autopsy process?
Yes.
Did you start with x-rays on the morning of April 12th?
Yes, in cases of gunshot wounds, we identify potential sites of injury and get x-rays of those so we can identify potential locations of bullets to make recovery easier the following day. So that did occur the morning of the 12th.
And if we could put Exhibit 110 on the screen, please. Could you describe for the jury what's shown here?
Yes, these are side-by-side images of Daunte Wright's chest, and you can see there's a number of things going on here. On the left-hand image, which is an anterior, posterior, or front-facing view, you can see a number of wires of medical interventions. On the decedent's right side, which is the left side in this view, we're looking at the images if we're looking at the patient. You can see a bright white object, and that is a retained projectile.
And if you could use, there's either a stylus like this or your finger to circle the item that you're describing on that image, please.
Yes, there I've circled the retained projectile.
And then after taking these x-rays, did you, slightly later in the morning, start the full autopsy exam process?
Yes.
And did that include, as you described earlier, examining the body as it was before cleaning and doing additional further examination?
Yes, that's standard procedure.
Could we put Exhibit 114 on the screen, please? Could you describe what's shown here, please, in Exhibit 114?
Yes, we take pictures of the body as is. So this is after I have broken the seal on the body bag, and without disturbing the body or any of the contents, we take the as-is photograph. So this is a view of the lower half of the decedent's body. You can see jeans there. There's a single shoe on the left foot, a sock on the right.
And the condition of the clothing and body as it is depicted here, was that as it was on scene when you had observed the body the day before?
Yes.
Could we put Exhibit 116 on the screen, please? And what's shown here?
So this is a photograph that is one image more superior or towards the head relative to the picture we just saw. I've placed a privacy towel over the decedent's privates, and what we're seeing here again is a view of the body similar to that as we saw in the field. You can see medical interventions, clothing as we saw it in the field, and particularly medical interventions overlying gunshot wounds of the chest here.
So at this point, all of those medical interventions are still attached to the body, is that right?
Yes, this is the very as-is photograph, so we haven't manipulated those interventions in any way.
If we could put Exhibit 118 on the screen, please. Did you do some further examination of those seals that you had described and sort of continue to look in those areas?
Yeah, so as I alluded to earlier, we take photographs and document what we see initially, and then we remove in a stepwise fashion the various clothing articles and interventions. What we're looking at here is the injury on the lower left side of the chest, and I've peeled away the occlusive dressing that was placed in the field.
And could you please, for the jury, just describe the difference between an entrance wound and an exit wound?
In general?
In general, and then as applied to the images that we see.
Yes. In general, entrance gunshot wounds have a circular or oval appearance. There's usually some missing tissue in the center of the wound. There can be abrasions around the edge of the wound. This particular image that we're looking at here does show a wound that has those features. We will see a cleaned up version of this in subsequent images.
And when you say those features, is what you observe here consistent with an entrance wound?
They are, yes.
And then if we could put Exhibit 119 on the screen, please. Could you describe what's shown here, please?
So this is the picture of the right side of the chest, again with the occlusive dressing peeled back, showing an area of injury. It's difficult to see here due to the presence of blood, but this is the opposite injury.
And when you say opposite injury, would you characterize that as, how would you characterize that?
Yes, we will see that the injury on the left side of the chest is an entrance wound, and this will be shown to show features of an exit gunshot wound. It happened when we peeled back this dressing that you could actually palpate or feel the bullet directly below the skin adjacent to this wound. So that was a definite clue that this was the exit side.
And then after removing the medical interventions, removing the seals, documenting that process as you went along, did you ultimately clean the body and then continue to do further investigation or examination?
Yes.
If we could put Exhibit 120 on the screen, please. Could you describe what's shown here, please?
So this is a view of Mr. Wright's chest from the front, and pictured here are the entrance and exit wounds. May I mark
Yes, you may.
these areas? So again, on the left side here and on the right side here are the gunshot wounds in question that we've looked at initially.
And what, if anything, is significant to you about the positioning of these two injuries?
Other than the fact that they are on the front side of the chest, the anterior side of the chest, and there's a little swelling around these wounds beneath the skin, suggestive of hemorrhage. Those are the major findings.
And I'll ask you some more about this as we go on to your internal examination, but looking at the body externally, did this give you any indication with respect to trajectory or a bullet path?
Yes, again, given the fact that there was a bullet present on the right side of the decedent's body and an entrance defect on the left side, it suggested a rightward progression of the bullet through the body.
And if you could just indicate with your finger the direction of travel that you're describing.
Yes, so a bullet entering approximately near this red dot, but below it would have traveled in this general direction here, as I've indicated.
And then if we could put Exhibits 121 and 122 on the screen next to each other. If Your Honor, if you could clear the screen, please. Thank you. Could you please describe for the jury what's shown in Exhibits 121 and 122?
Yes, so this is a left side view of the body in the left-hand photograph. We've looked at this from the front and with the occlusive dressing peeled partly off. What we're seeing here is the cleaned version. On the right-hand side is a zoomed-in image of the wound on that left side of the body.
And as part of your autopsy process, when it comes to gunshot wounds, do you typically look for things like soot or stippling on the body?
Absolutely. In addition to trying to assess what an entrance or an exit wound might be, we try to assess for clues as to range of fire. And sometimes these are present, sometimes they are not. When we have, for instance, evidence of a muzzle abrasion, so markings on the skin suggestive of contact with a gun, then we know it's a contact range of fire. If we find evidence of soot or gunpowder deposition or gunpowder stippling, which is a punctate or dot-like abrasions on the skin that occur based on the impact of gunpowder, we can say that it was a intermediate range of fire, so between contact and 2 or 3 feet at most. In this case, we found none of those identifiers, not on the skin and not on the clothing, so we settled on indeterminate range of fire, given the lack of specific evidence.
And just to clarify, when you say you saw none of those, you did not see or stippling, is that correct?
Correct.
And when you say indeterminate, maybe you could just describe to the jury, what does it mean to have an indeterminate range of fire?
So indeterminate range of fire simply means that we don't have specific clues as to a definite range of fire, so it leaves it open to the possibility of interpretation.
If we could put exhibits 123 and 124 on the screen, please, next to each other. Dr. Jackson, exhibits 123 and 124 are on the screen. Could you please describe what's shown here?
Yes, the image on the left shows a gunshot-related defect, correction, on the right side of the body, and the image on the right is a close-up photograph of that same injury.
And how would you describe this? I know you had initially used the term maybe partial exit wound. Do you have another way of describing this injury as well?
Yes, let me just explain what a partial exit wound is. If the bullet goes in and out of the body, you have a classic exit wound. In this instance, because the bullet made a defect, made a hole in the skin, but did not leave the body, we call this a partial exit. And this occurs when there's not enough velocity for the bullet to escape the body. We see this on occasion. Other features of this injury that we see are areas of red-brown abrasion and that are present on the edges of the wound. And this is something that is consistent with what we call a shored exit. And this can occur when the skin is pinched between the bullet, which is pushing outward on the skin, and rubbing against some other object. In this case, it's likely the clothing, the decedent's clothing, such that the skin gets pinched there and a rub spot occurs or an abrasion is formed.
Now, Dr. Jackson, before we get to your internal exam, I'd like to ask about the rest of the body. Did you also examine the rest of the body for injury?
Yes.
And if we could put exhibit 125 on the screen, please. Could you describe what's shown in exhibit 125, please?
Yes, this exhibit shows a close-up of the decedent's face and neck area. And on this image, which is a cleaned image, we can see areas of abrasion on the right nostril region and what is a laceration with some abrasion below the right lip.
And if we could put exhibit 127 on the screen, please. Could you describe what's shown here?
Yes, this is a picture of the decedent's lower lip, and on that right aspect of the lower lip, you can see a laceration. This actually communicated with the abraded-looking lesion on the prior image.
And how would you characterize these injuries to the face that you saw in exhibits 125 and 127 on the lip and the nose?
I would call these superficial blunt force injuries.
And when you say superficial, what does that mean?
I would say that these injuries are non-life threatening, particularly in with respect to comparison with the gunshot wound.
Are they consistent with the circumstances that you were aware of surrounding the time of death, including a potential vehicle collision?
Yes.
Were these injuries significant in any way with respect to your finding of cause and manner of death?
No, the blunt force injuries that we identified on the body did not contribute to the cause of death.
And did you also examine the rest of the body for other injuries as well?
Yes.
Did you find some other superficial injuries?
Yes, there were other superficial abrasions and some bruises or contusions.
Bruises and contusions, were those on things like the arms and legs?
Yes.
Could you just provide sort of a general overview of the types of things that you saw?
Yes, so small abrasions were found on the arm and forearm on the left side. For instance, these appeared much like rug burns in terms of their degree of depth. So again, superficial injuries. There were some minor abrasions on the right and left sides of the back, very much like simple scratches, and there were some contusions or bruises on the lower extremities as well, around the knees and the thigh on the left side.
Were any of those injuries that you observed that you described as superficial, were any of them significant with respect to your findings of cause and manner of death in this case?
No.
Would they all be consistent with the circumstances surrounding death, including a vehicle collision?
Certainly the collision or the process of extrication and resuscitation.
And when you discuss extrication, did you also observe some dirt or grass on the body as well before it was cleaned?
Yes, there were a few streaks, linear marks, as if someone had been pulled across dirt, yes.
And again, were those consistent with what you understood to be the circumstances surrounding the collision and the extrication from the car?
Yes.
All right, getting back to, what was the most significant injury with respect to your exam?
Far and away, the gunshot wound to the chest was the most significant injury.
Now, getting back to that gunshot wound, you told the jury a little bit about your external exam and your observations there. Was the trajectory in that bullet path further evidenced by the internal exam that you conducted?
Yes.
And then, with respect to that internal exam, did you follow that same protocol, that same procedure that you described earlier?
Yes.
And did that include examining the inside of the body and the organs as well?
Yes.
And conducting that part of the exam, were you also able to determine what organs had been struck by the projectile inside Daunte Wright's body?
Yes.
And then did you ultimately recover a projectile as well?
I did, yes.
And where was that projectile recovered from, approximately?
Yes, so that projectile was recovered from the skin, or below the skin on the right side of the chest wall near the fourth intercostal muscle, and that's between the level of the fourth and fifth ribs approximately.
If we could put Exhibit 141 on the screen, please. Could you describe what's shown there, please?
Yes, so this is an image. We've progressed to the internal portion of the examination, and this is a view of Mr. Wright's chest with the skin reflected. So what we're looking at are the ribs and the breastbone, and you can see areas of hemorrhage on the left and right side of the body that are consistent with the points of entry and exit of the bullet through the chest wall.
And could you just indicate on the screen where those areas of hemorrhage are, please?
Yes, so these are the dark areas present here and on the right side in this vicinity.
Okay. And then was there could you indicate the approximate area where the projectile was recovered as well?
Yes, the projectile would have been recovered. So the defect in the muscle on the right side is approximately here, so the projectile was recovered near where I made an attempted asterisk.
And then if we could put, just a moment, if we could put Exhibit 143 on the screen, please. Could you describe what's shown here?
Yes, so this might be a little bit disorienting. This is a view of the chest plate that we've removed, and it's viewed from the inside. So what we're seeing here are the ribs, and we're seeing the perforations through the muscles and the bone on the left-hand side. And there's a probe that's inserted to demonstrate the approximate path of the bullet. And again, this is inside the chest, so the left side is the decedent's left side, and the right side is the decedent's right side.
And do you, through the course of your work, sometimes use rods or probes like this to help you establish trajectory or a bullet path?
We do.
And if we could put Exhibit 145 on the screen, please. Could you describe what's shown here, please?
Yes, this is a review or an the exhibit that shows the damage to the front of the heart, and there is a gap in the tissue covering the right ventricle, the left ventricle, and the muscular septum that divides the two ventricles.
And when you say gap in the tissue, maybe you could just describe what you mean by that.
Yes, there is normally, instead of being able to see inside of the heart, there's tissue and blood vessels that would span this gap, this defect that we're seeing in the heart wall. And they're
So-
missing here in this image.
And in a normal heart, a healthy heart, would that all be covered up?
Correct. It would look more like the surfaces that you're seeing at the very top of the image.
Okay. We could put Exhibit 146 on the screen, please. Now, using this image, could you please describe what organs were impacted and what you observed on the inside of the body with respect to the trajectory?
Yes, I selected this diagram, and I would point out that it is a diagram in 2 dimensions, so it doesn't capture exactly the orientation in the body, but it does show the general pattern of injury. So there is an arrow superimposed over the heart and lungs depicted in this diagram. The entrance point was somewhere near the base of the arrow, and the bullet was recovered somewhere near the tip of the arrow. So you can see, even though that the wound direction was shallow through the chest, as we saw in the previous image, it did cross areas of the left lung, the heart, and the right lung.
Again, members of the jury, remember this is demonstrative evidence. It will not go back to the jury room with you.
Dr. Jackson, I know I didn't show you photographs of the lungs, but could you describe for the jury the damage to the organs in the body that you observed consistent with this demonstrative exhibit?
Yes, both the left lung and the right lung, the anterior portions, or the portions abutting the chest wall in the front, were damaged, almost a graze wound, but very superficially injured by the bullet. The majority of the injury was to the heart.
Did you also recover a substantial amount of blood from inside Mr. Wright's body during this process?
Yes.
Approximately how much blood did you recover?
So the combined volume from both sides of the chest, so around the right and left lungs and the heart, were over 3 liters of blood.
And 3 liters, why is that significant?
That's significant because an individual of Mr. Wright's size would have approximately 4.5 to 5.5 liters of blood in his entire body, and when you lose half of that rapidly, your condition becomes critical.
And when you say critical, what does that mean?
It's a life-threatening situation.
With respect to timing, was this gunshot wound, the injuries that you observed through the heart and the lungs, was that a survivable injury?
As a forensic pathologist, I would say no.
How long does it take for someone to die after being shot through the lungs and heart like this?
Injuries like this, we refer to survival times in terms of seconds to minutes in these types of injuries.
And with respect to loss of consciousness, how long does it take for someone to lose consciousness after an injury like this?
Well, one can lose consciousness within 10 to 15 seconds after blood supply is cut off to the brain.
Now, Dr. Jackson, do you have, throughout your experience as an assistant medical examiner, experience with a variety of different types of ammunition of different calibers?
Yes, that's part of our training.
And have you observed and recovered projectiles of both large and small caliber?
Yes.
If we could put exhibits 147 and 148 on the screen next to each other, please. You indicated that you recovered a projectile. Could you just describe what's shown here, please?
Yes, so this is the image on the left and right show front and back views of the projectile that I've recovered. It's a clean view. What we're seeing here is a projectile with an expanded tip. It's a copper color jacketed projectile with a lead color core, and the image on the left shows the base view of the projectile, which had a measured diameter of 9 millimeters.
And with respect to your measurements, would that be consistent with a 9mm round?
Certainly would, and those are measurements I made at the time of autopsy.
And when you describe the expansion or the condition of the bullet, maybe you could contrast that with other bullets that you've seen.
Well, I think what we're seeing here is a bullet that does show an expanded tip, and some people call this mushrooming, the appearance that we're seeing here. Others see a petal-like arrangement, and this can happen in certain types of ammunition.
And would that be consistent with a hollow point round?
Yes, hollow points often look like this.
And what, if anything, in your experience as an assistant Hennepin County medical examiner, is significant about a round of ammunition that displays this type of effect, this petaling or mushrooming?
I think the main thing is these bullets oftentimes stop within the body, which is consistent with what we found here.
And again, is the condition of this bullet and the injuries that you saw, is the condition of the bullet consistent with the injuries that you saw,
Yes.
including the damage to the heart and the lungs?
Yes, a bullet like this could cause the injuries that we've observed.
You also described an examination of clothing. Did you examine Mr. Wright's clothing in this case as well?
Yes, I did.
If we could put exhibits 149 and 152 on the screen next to each other, please. Could you describe what's shown here, please?
Yes, this is Mr. Wright's shirt, the shirt that he wore presumably under his jacket. I've put it in place on a mannequin so that we could photograph it, and there are defects on the left and right sides depicted here. They're small, but they're present.
And when you say defects, could you circle them or indicate them, please, on the screen?
Yes, so on the left-hand image, I'm going to circle an area on the front left side of the shirt. I put a piece of white gauze behind the hole of the defect to illustrate where that is. And on the image on the right, which is the right-hand side of the shirt, I will circle this image here. That is an area of a defect in the fabric or a hole in the fabric.
So when you say defect, does that mean hole in this case?
Yes, they're interchangeable.
And were those holes consistent with the trajectory and the injuries that you observed?
Yes, they approximately recapitulate the injuries that we saw on the body.
And then if we could put exhibits 150, or just put exhibit 155 alone on the screen, please. Did you also examine a jacket as well that Mr. Wright was wearing?
Yes, this is the jacket as placed again on the mannequin.
And with respect to the red substance on the clothing, was that consistent with blood?
Yes.
And then if we could put exhibits 157 and 158 next to each other on the screen, please. Did you also examine the jacket for defects or holes?
Yes, and holes were found near the pockets on both sides of the front of this jacket.
And if you could indicate them on the screen.
Yes, so on the left, circled here, is a hole with frayed margins that is present near the front left pocket. And on the right image is a defect that I found in the lining of the pocket, the right pocket. And again, I put white gauze behind that to make it photo worthy.
Now, obviously, Dr. Jackson, the pocket line of someone's clothing might not be typically where you would expect to find the heart. Could you describe if these defects or holes would be consistent with clothing being bunched up or raised up on the body?
Yes, certainly, depending on where the clothing was positioned, they could be consistent with the pattern. And we do have them on the left and right sides of the garment. And again, that, like we saw in the shirt, it is similar and supports the same pattern we saw on the body.
Now, during your autopsy examination, did you collect a number of samples as well?
I did.
Things like blood and hair, nail clippings, and fingerprints? Is that
Yes.
right? And you indicated that you also collected these, this projectile as well as the clothing, is that right?
Correct.
And were those items all provided to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension?
Yes, they were.
And then with respect to the toxicology testing in this case, did you also collect femoral blood and urine for toxicology testing in the afternoon of April 12th?
Yes, during the course of the autopsy.
And then did you order testing on those samples as well?
I did.
And what screens were done on the blood?
So we did a comprehensive screen on the blood, and that includes an expanded panel and additional studies. And our aim was to potentially survey for as many possible drugs as possible in this case.
Did that include looking for hundreds of drugs?
Yes, hundreds of drugs were sought after, yes.
And what did you get the results of those tests?
We did.
And what, if any, compounds were found from the testing of the femoral blood?
Cannabinoids were the only thing found in the decedent's system.
And when you say cannabinoids, is that THC and its metabolites?
Exactly that, yes.
And are those related to marijuana?
They are.
Were those toxicology results that you received in any way significant with respect to your determination of cause and manner of death?
No, they were not.
And then on exam, did you find any natural disease or natural defect that would have caused Mr. Wright's death?
No, the only thing we found were injury-related changes associated with the gunshot wound.
And now, Dr. Jackson, based on your training and experience, did you ultimately determine a cause of death for Daunte Wright in this case?
Yes.
And what was the cause of death?
The cause of death in this case was gunshot wound of the chest.
And did you also determine a manner of death for Daunte Wright?
Yes, this is certified as a homicide.
And what is the definition of homicide with respect to your work?
Homicide is death at the hands of another.
And how did you make the determination that Daunte Wright died by homicide?
The examination of the wound and the history provided supported that he was shot by another individual and succumbed to those injuries.
And if we could put Exhibit 160 on the screen, please. Dr. Jackson, is this a copy of your office's final ME report for Daunte Wright?
Yes.
And that's based on your findings, but signed by the chief medical examiner in your office?
That's correct. That's routine policy. Yeah.
And with respect to manner of death, focusing on this area here, what is indicated as the manner of death?
Manner of death is homicide.
And what's the immediate cause that's indicated?
Gunshot.
I object to this. He's gone over this 3 times now. The cause and manner of death.
The objection is overruled. You may answer.
You may answer, Dr. Jackson.
The immediate cause of death is gunshot wound of the chest.
And then did you also indicate how the injury occurred?
Yes.
And how was that?
And we've listed here, decedent was shot by another person, and in parentheses, law enforcement officer.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Counsel, you may cross.
Yeah.
You may cross.
Okay. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
With respect to the homicide and cause and manner of death, that has nothing to do with criminal statutes, is that right?
That is correct. Our manner is a medical opinion.
Okay, yeah, and it's quite obvious that the cause of death in this case was a gunshot wound to the chest, correct?
Agreed.
And I notice in your autopsy, your final autopsy, excuse me, you wrote 20-year-old man who was shot by a police officer after a traffic stop and subsequently drove his car a short distance before colliding with another vehicle. Is that the information you received when you came on the scene?
That's correct.
And the marijuana found in the system, did you send that to a lab or some other place to determine how much marijuana was in the system?
Well, as a part of the normal toxicology studies, they do quantify those numbers, the numbers of marijuana or anything they do find, yes.
And do you know what we quantify what the result was?
They're in my report.
Okay, and what are they?
If I may refer to my report.
Sure.
So in the femoral blood, we found 11-hydroxy delta-9 THC, which is a metabolite. The level present was 6.9 nanograms per milliliter. There was delta-9 carboxy THC, which is an inactive metabolite. This was present at a concentration of 120 nanograms per milliliter. And delta-9 THC, which is the active ingredient in marijuana, the level was 43 nanograms per milliliter.
And the active ingredient, what you mean by that is that's what affects you when you take the marijuana?
Yes.
And is 43 a high reading?
43 is a number within the normal range of individuals reported that use marijuana.
Okay. Use marijuana regularly or right before the death?
That's difficult to ascertain based on just the numbers alone.
I don't know if you answered my question. Is that a high reading based on your experience, toxicology-wise?
It's on the high end of numbers that I see, yes.
Thanks. And you testified that Mr. Wright was conscious for seconds after he was shot. Fair statement?
No, I said the injury he sustained, he could survive for minutes, seconds to minutes, and then if blood supply is cut off to the brain, then one can be rendered unconscious in a short time, matter of seconds.
Yes, that's what I meant. You do know in this case, from what you were briefed on, that Mr. Wright said, "You shot me." Did you know that?
No, I'm not aware of that.
Pardon me?
I'm not aware of statements uttered by the decedent.
In any event, as you reported, he drove off after he was shot. Is that what you learned?
That was reported, yes.
And he could have driven off like that for up to a minute. Fair statement?
Objection calls for speculation.
He's the expert judge.
The objection is overruled.
So he could have driven off like that and been alive for up to a minute. Fair statement?
I would say that's possible.
Thank you, sir. That's all I have.
Is there any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Jackson, you were asked about what might possibly happen to a body under these circumstances. If you could just describe to the jury what physiologically happens to the body when a heart is shot with a gunshot.
In my profession, we don't see directly what happens to individuals. We are called in after the fact. But from my medical training, when an individual loses significant blood, they tend to become unconscious, or they could exhibit altered mental status.
And when you say loses significant blood, did you recover a significant amount of blood from inside Daunte Wright's body?
Yes,
Consistent with blood loss that you're describing.
correct.
And when you see someone lose blood in the amount of 3 liters, what do you expect to happen to them physiologically?
I expect physiologically for the heart to be unable to pump blood to the organs, and I expect to see organs that shut down and loss of function occurring.
And when you expect to see that the heart isn't pumping blood and the organs are not functioning, what does that look like from the outside?
Could you clarify what you're asking?
Sure. If the heart is not able to pump blood to the organs and the body is losing blood, what happens to an observer? What does the observer see is happening to the body?
I think the person observing might see someone that appears unconscious or unresponsive, if that's what you're asking.
Yes. So you'd expect someone that was shot through the heart to be unconscious within a matter of seconds. Is that fair?
Check that as leading, Your Honor. It's also repetitious.
Objection is sustained.
I'll move on, Your Honor. With respect to marijuana or the THC levels that you saw, you indicated that those were potentially on high levels of what you've seen. Is that right?
Yes.
In the course of your career of doing 1,800 plus autopsies, have you ever ruled a death, an overdose as a result of marijuana use?
I have not.
So when you say that these levels are insignificant with respect to your cause and manner of death finding, what does that mean?
That means relative to the injury sustained during the gunshot wound, there is no significant importance to the level of THC found in the decedent's system.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Anything further?
You understood, did you not, Doctor, that when I was asking about the marijuana, I was not implying that this was the cause of death. I was just asking what was in his blood, correct?
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
All right. You may step down. Thank you.
Thank you.
The state may call its next witness.
Your Honor, this time the state calls Melissa Loren.
Okay, good morning. Please stand behind the witness chair and raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully testify in this case?
I do.
Please have a seat. Remove your mask. I'm going to give you some rules for testifying. The court reporter is taking down everything being said, so you have to answer with a yes or no instead of shaking your head. No, or uh-huh, because that's not a clear record. If you don't understand a question, let the lawyer know. Only one person can speak at a time, so wait until the question's finished before you answer. And finally, if an objection is made, stop talking. Don't answer the question unless I tell you to.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Counsel?
Ms. Loren, could you state your occupation for the record?
I work at the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension in the Forensic Science Lab, and I am the technical leader of our crime scene team.
How long have you been employed by the BCA?
I've worked there just over 11 years.
Could you please tell the jury about your education and training?
My education, I have a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. And my training in forensics, most of it has come from my employment at the BCA. I have training in mitochondrial DNA, which is part of our missing persons group, nuclear DNA, forensic hair comparisons, which I obtained out at Quantico, the FBI lab, and a lot of crime scene training. My training is to be a team leader is in evidence collection, processing, and report writing.
I just want to take a step back for a moment. Can you discuss the duties of the BCA Crime Lab generally?
Yes, our crime lab is made up mostly of scientists They examine items of evidence to assist in investigations of criminal cases. And we have multiple different sections. So we have a biology section that focuses on DNA and body fluid identification. We also have a latent print section, firearms and tool marks, trace evidence, drug chemistry, toxicology, and then our crime scene team is also part of the forensic lab.
Is the crime scene lab an accredited lab?
Yes, we are.
And does the crime lab go through an evaluation process to maintain that accreditation?
Yes, we do.
And as part of that evaluation or audit process, is your work or proficiency or competency also evaluated?
Yes, it is.
And how often is that done?
We have a full accreditation audit every 4 years, and then a surveillance visit every year, and then we also do an internal audit every year.
Okay. As a crime scene team leader, could you describe your present duties?
Sure. As a team leader, I lead a team of scientists out at crime scenes. I lead them in everything from documentation of the crime scene, so that would be photography, video, also note-taking about our observations and diagramming. And then I lead them in crime scene processing, so things like latent prints, collection of samples for DNA, things like that, and then also evidence collection and packaging.
And overall, would you agree that you've been trained on a number of skills personally in forensic science?
Yes, I have.
And that would include these subject matter of collecting and handling evidence and collecting DNA and testing DNA.
Yes.
Would you also agree that you're trained in bloodstain pattern analysis?
Yes, I am.
All right. Now, you've testified in court as an expert before.
Yes, I have.
All right. Now, on what sort of cases does the crime scene team respond to?
Our team responds to homicides, death investigations, missing persons cases, officer-involved shootings or use of force cases, and also clandestine grave recoveries.
When you respond to a scene, what duties does that typically entail?
Responding to a scene, the duties I have are, again, leading the team, making sure that everything is documented appropriately. So overall photographs and video are taken, items of evidence are identified and marked as items of evidence, and those are also photographed. I lead the team in the processing of anything that we need to process depending on the scene circumstances, and then the collection of the evidence, the packaging of the evidence. I'm also responsible for ensuring that evidence is sealed appropriately, brought back to our laboratory for secure storage, and then I coordinate with our agents on the forensic testing of those items.
Okay. I want to talk about one more topic generally before we get into the April 11th, and this is just about the process by which you collect an item and keep track of it. Could you describe how that work is done?
Sure. So when an item is identified at a scene and we decide that we're going to collect it, we put an item number next to it and have a photo taken of that item with that item number. That item number stays with that item from the crime scene through the forensic testing in the lab and all the way to court. Those items are marked on the packaging. We barcode those packages so that they can be tracked throughout the laboratory. And that's pretty much it.
Okay. Why don't we move on to April 11th of 2021? Were you on duty that day?
I was on call that day, yes.
Okay. And what did you respond to a communication that afternoon?
Yes, I did.
What did that communication pertain to?
I received a phone call and was told that there had been an officer-involved shooting in Brooklyn Center.
What did you do in response to that call?
I notified my team that's on call that we were going to be responding to a scene. I do that by sending out a text message, basically. And then we met at the BCA laboratory.
Why do you go to the BCA lab first? Pardon me, the BCA lab, that's in St. Paul, right?
Correct.
Why do you go to the BCA lab first?
We go to the BCA lab so I can get a laboratory case number for the case, and then we also take our crime scene response vehicle out to the scene. That vehicle has everything inside of it that we need for packaging and evidence processing.
Okay. And did you ultimately respond to the scene of the shooting in Brooklyn Center?
Yes, I did.
And was that at the intersection of 63rd Avenue and Catherine Drive?
Yes.
Do you recall when you arrived at the scene?
We arrived at 4:45 p.m.
Okay. And how many people were on your team when you arrived?
It was myself. I had my team member, a technician, an additional team member that I was mentoring for crime scene team leader training, and our photographer.
What did you do when you first arrived?
When we first arrived, we had a briefing with Special Agent Mike Phil.
And as you came to the scene, did you, based on your training and experience, sort of define what the scene actually was going to be for you?
Yes.
And what was that?
Mike Phil gave us information about
The objection is overruled. You may continue.
I believe when we left off, the question was, how did you define the crime scene based on the information you obtained?
the briefing information I was given gave us the overall location of where to focus on to look for items of evidence. And we were told that there had been a traffic incident and an officer had fired their firearm. After that, there had been a vehicle collision, and the driver of one of the vehicles was deceased on scene.
After you observed the general appearance of the scene, what did you begin to do?
So the first thing that I did was have a walkthrough of the scene so I could observe everything before we started any type of processing or documentation. Then I had overall photographs and video taken of the area, and then I started to identify items of evidence and mark those items so that they could be placed into a diagram, and we started collecting those items at that time.
At some point, were there items located at the scene that you did document and mark?
Yes.
Is there a specific area where you directed your attention at the scene?
We directed our attention around the Buick vehicle that Mr. Wright was said to have been driving, and also the area where we were told that the traffic stop had occurred.
And did you look for any evidence that you believed to be pertinent to the investigation inside the vehicle?
Yes, I did.
Did you locate something that attracted your attention at that time?
Yes, I did.
And what was that?
I found a cartridge case on the front driver's seat of the vehicle.
Okay. And are you familiar with the terminology of discharge cartridge casing, or DCC?
Yes, I am.
Is the item that you found frequently referred to as a discharge cartridge casing, or DCC?
Yes.
Could you unpack for the jury what a discharge cartridge casing is?
Sure. When you load a pistol with ammunition, the ammunition itself is actually called a cartridge. The cartridge is a cartridge case that's holding the projectile or the bullet. So when the firearm is fired, the bullet dislodges from the cartridge case and the bullet goes down the barrel of the gun. And the cartridge case is typically ejected out of the chamber of the gun, and they can be found at shooting scenes.
Okay. And you noted the location of this DCC?
Yes, I did.
And did you mark its location with an evidence marker?
Yes.
Am I correct that you assigned it evidence marker 7?
Yes.
And did you eventually collect the discharge cartridge casing?
Yes, I did.
And that was retained by the BCA throughout this investigation?
Yes.
And that maintained and retained that item number 7 throughout the investigation, correct?
Yes, it did.
Following your on-scene examination of the vehicle, what was done with that white Buick?
The white Buick was tape sealed and then towed to our BCA headquarters processing garage for further examination.
Okay. Was there another damaged vehicle on the scene?
Yes, there was.
What was done with that vehicle?
That vehicle was documented on scene and then was also towed, but not to our processing garage.
In addition to the discharge cartridge casing, were there other items that you collected from the scene?
Yes, we collected various items that we found along 63rd Avenue North.
Okay. And you documented and recovered those items as well?
Yes.
Okay. In addition to the physical items, did your investigation lead to an examination of Mr. Wright?
Yes, it did.
Okay. And at that time, when you arrived, he was placed under a tent?
Yes.
And are you aware that the Henner County Medical Examiner came to the scene?
Yes, he did.
And were you present when they were examining the body at the scene?
Yes.
Okay. And ultimately, Mr. Wright's body was transported away from the scene, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall what time that occurred?
He was transported at 6:40 p.m.
Okay. Now, did you create a scene map which shows the location of items that you recovered?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And does that also include the location of where you located item number 7, the discharge cartridge casing?
Yes.
Okay. At this time, the state offers Exhibit 161, scene map.
Any objection to 161? 161 will be admitted and you may publish.
Ms. Loren, the jury has seen a couple of maps without markings on them throughout this trial, but could you describe the location depicted on this image at this time?
Sure. This is a top-down view of 63rd Avenue North running east and west. And at this location here is Catherine Drive.
Okay. And then I just want to direct your attention to the intersection of 63rd Avenue and Catherine Drive. Would you agree that there's a red number 7 at that intersection?
Yes, there is.
Okay. Could you just testify as to where that was located?
Yes, so the white rectangle in the diagram is depicting the location where the Buick sedan was, and the 7 is where our discharge cartridge case, item number 7, was collected from the front driver's seat of that car.
Thank you. You can take that on, Mr. Miller. I now want to go through a few photographs from the scene. In preparation for trial, did you review with me and recognize a series of photographs?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, at this time, the state offers Exhibits 162 to 174, noting that 166 and 167 are already admitted.
Okay. Any objection to those exhibits?
It would appear 169 and 170 are otherwise no objection.
Those exhibits will be admitted subject to over the objection of defense counsel. And you may publish, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, Ms. Loren, I will show you Exhibit 162. And what I'll do, Ms. Loren, is ask you to describe what's shown on the screen in each image to assist the jury in understanding your testimony, okay? This first one, Exhibit 162, could you describe what you see on the screen?
This is a photo taken from 63rd Avenue North facing east. We're facing the area where you can see the white Buick sedan on the northwest corner of Catherine Drive. On the right, you can see our BCA crime scene response vehicle is on scene. And in the center median there, you can see, it's kind of hard to see, but there is a traffic sign that's down in that area.
Let's move to Exhibit 163 to see if that assists. What is shown here in Exhibit 163?
This is that center median on 63rd Avenue North with the down traffic sign.
Okay, and could you assist the jury? And can you, with a pen or finger, circle where you see the down traffic sign?
Here is the broken metal, and here is the sign.
Thank you. And I'm showing you you're identifying the sign right center in the middle of the picture, sort of toward the top third of the image, correct?
Yes, correct.
Thank you. Now Exhibit 164. You'd agree this is just, again, looking east down 63rd at the damaged vehicles?
Correct, yes.
Exhibit 165. Would you agree this is also looking east down 63rd at the damaged vehicles, but a bit closer up to see both of them on the screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Exhibit 166. What is shown here?
This is the front end of the Buick sedan, showing some front end damage, and the driver door was open upon our arrival.
There appears to be some black equipment on the ground in front of the vehicle. Can you identify what that is?
It appears to be a police shield.
Exhibit 167 now, Mr. Miller. What is shown here?
This is the passenger front side of the Buick, showing a defect in the passenger windshield.
Okay. 168. What is shown here?
This is the front driver's side of the Buick, showing the front driver's side seat.
Okay. Exhibit 169. Would you agree this is just a image down, looking down at the ground of the front driver's seat?
Yes.
We're going to see a close-up in a minute, but in this image, can you see the discharge cartridge casing?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I'm now showing Exhibit 171. Could you tell the jury what you see in Exhibit 171?
This is the discharge cartridge case on the front driver's seat, marked as item number 7.
Okay. Exhibit 172. Would you agree that 172 is just an image of the top of the discharge cartridge casing after it was recovered?
Yes.
Okay. Exhibit 173. What is this shown?
This is a photo of a backpack that was outside of the front driver's door that we were told had been in the vehicle at some point in time.
And what did you do with that bag when you saw it?
We documented the bag, and I looked inside of it quickly to see if there was anything significant inside, and then I put it on the front driver floor to be towed back to the BCA with the vehicle and its contents.
Okay. And then Exhibit 174. And would you agree this is just the tent that was placed around Mr. Wright's body when you were present at the scene?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. You can take that down, Mr. Miller. Now, you reported that you collected that single discharge cartridge casing from the scene, and you eventually inventoried that?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Your Honor, the state offers Exhibit 200, which I'm going to retrieve in a moment, the discharge cartridge casing.
Any objection to 200? Okay, 200 will be admitted into evidence.
Ms. Loren, I'm going to show you a few things today. I'm going to try to walk close up to you, probably not hand you anything, just so that you have an opportunity to see it, okay?
Sure.
Ms. Loren, I've just shown you Exhibit 200. Do you recognize what that is?
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
That is our BCA lab, item number 7, the discharge cartridge case from the front driver's seat.
How long did you remain at the scene?
We were there for just under 3 hours.
Prior to your departure, did you receive several additional physical items from another BCA agent?
Yes, I did.
And what agent was that?
Special Agent Sam McGinnis.
And what did you receive?
I received a toxicology kit from Officer Potter and 2 firearms, one from Officer Johnson and one from Officer Potter.
Okay. And when you received the 2 firearms, did you get information as to how to differentiate them?
Yes, the boxes had markings on them as to which firearm was which, and then there was also a receipt that had information on it that matched each firearm.
Okay. The condition of Sergeant Johnson's firearm, was it loaded, unloaded, or something else?
Sergeant Johnson's firearm was unloaded.
Okay. Did it have a magazine inserted in it?
No, it did not.
And Officer Potter's gun?
Officer Potter's gun contained the firearm and the magazine that had ammunition in it and a 1 cartridge in the box.
Okay. Now, did you assign those firearms evidence numbers as well?
Yes, I did.
And what was Johnson's gun identified as?
Item number 12.
And Potter's gun was identified as?
Item number 13.
Okay. And after you documented and identified those with crime lab numbers, did those leave the scene with you?
Yes, they did.
And were they later inventoried at the BCA?
Yes, they were.
And did you follow your typical protocol of photographing and documenting those items prior to actually putting them in the evidence vault?
Yes, I did.
Okay. If I showed you 2 photographs you took of Sergeant Johnson's firearm, BCA item number 12, would you recognize them?
Yes.
The state offers exhibits 167 and 177, photographs of Sergeant Johnson's firearm.
Any objections? 167 and 177 will be admitted into evidence.
Yes, please, first 176. Pardon me. To clarify, I may have misspoke. It's 176 and 177. Everyone's head nodding. I just didn't hear myself.
Thank you.
176. I'm showing you exhibit 176 at this time. What is shown on the screen?
This is Sergeant Johnson's firearm,
Okay.
item 12.
And the post-it note may be heavily washed out on certain screens. Can you see a post-it note on the top of this image which has a number on it?
Yes, I do.
And what number is identified there?
12.
12. Okay. The next exhibit 177, Mr. Miller. What is shown here?
This is the serial number of Sergeant Johnson's firearm.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's now move on to Officer Potter's firearm. If I showed you a series of photographs you took of that firearm, would you recognize them?
Yes, I would.
The state at this time offers exhibits 178 to 183, photographs of Potter's gun and ammo.
Okay, those exhibits will be admitted into evidence, and you may publish the photos.
Thank you. Let's start with exhibit 178. What do you see in exhibit 178, Ms. Loren?
This is Officer Potter's firearm and the loose cartridge that's in the box, as well as the magazine that was loaded.
Okay. And exhibit 179. What's shown here?
This is the serial number of Officer Potter's firearm.
180. Is this just an image sort of the loaded magazine, which you can see has live ammunition in it?
Yes.
Exhibit 181. Is this the live round which is taken from the chamber of the firearm?
Yes, it is.
Exhibit 182. Is this just a close-up view of the magazine which shows that it's loaded with ammunition?
Yes.
and then Exhibit 183. Could you explain to the jury what is shown in Exhibit 183?
When I received the firearm and did this documentation, I removed all of the cartridges out of the magazine for photo documentation to inventory how many rounds were in the magazine.
And that's what's shown in this image.
Yes.
Okay. And Ms. Loren, if I showed you the actual firearm, Potter's firearm, would you recognize it?
Yes.
At this time, the state offers Exhibit 199, Your Honor.
No objection?
199 will be omitted. Members of the jury, I've already advised you that the gun has been secured and cannot be discharged. Okay.
Ms. Loren, I'm approaching with Exhibit 199. You can see the sticker there on the top of this box. What do you see in front of you?
I see Officer Potter's firearm. It is a Glock 9mm semi-automatic pistol and the magazine.
If I showed you the ammunition which was removed from Officer Potter's firearm, would you recognize it?
Yes.
State offers Exhibit 202.
No objection. 202 will be omitted.
Now, this might take a second for you to describe this, how this is set up, Ms. Loren. You agree there's an evidence sticker 202 on there, right?
Yes.
And then here, there's an individual live round. What is shown on this part of the exhibit?
This is the cartridge that was said to be taken out of the chamber of the gun.
Okay. And then there's a collection of live firearms in another part of this exhibit. Would you agree this is the live ammo that was taken from the magazine?
Yes.
Okay. Moving on to another topic. You previously testified that Mr. Wright's white Buick was towed, right?
Yes.
Did you ever examine that vehicle again?
Yes, I did.
And when was that?
The following morning on April 12th at around 10 o'clock in the morning.
And where did that search occur?
That occurred at the BCA headquarters processing garage in St. Paul.
And when you began to search the vehicle, was it still secured with the tape that you placed on it the day before?
Yes, it was.
Who was present when you searched the vehicle?
It was myself. I had the same people that were on my team at the scene, except for the technician. So I had a team member that was in team leader training, and also an agent to do the photographs.
What actions were taken beyond photographs when you conducted the search?
So I marked items of evidence inside of the vehicle that I could see clearly and had photos taken of those. And then I also removed all of the contents of the vehicle and separated them out by the area they were found in, and then took photos of those areas and then marked additional items of evidence.
Sure. And you generated a report documenting the search?
Yes.
Okay. And when you searched the vehicle, you did take a substantial number of photographs, correct?
Our photographer did, yes.
Yep. And you've reviewed a set of 7 photographs prior to trial, correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, the state offers exhibits 184 to 190 photographs of the inside of Wright's vehicle at the time of the search warrant.
Is there any objection to 184 to 190?
Reject 184 to 186.
Oh, okay.
That's redundant.
All right. I've already made rulings on that. I'm going to admit 184 to 190 over the defense objections, and you may publish.
Thank you, Your Honor. Prior to showing Exhibit 184, what is the value of taking photographs in the crime lab facility rather than on the scene?
When it's possible, which is usually with vehicles, we just have a more controlled environment in our processing garage. We have better lighting, plus we don't have anyone from the general public around to see the contents when we put them out.
Okay, thank you. 184, Mr. Miller. Could you describe what's shown here?
This is the front driver's seat of the Buick.
Exhibit 185. What's shown here?
This is the front driver floor of the Buick showing a shoe.
186. What is shown in Exhibit 186?
This is a photo of the Buick taken from the rear driver's side showing the center console area.
So you agree this photograph is essentially taken as someone would be standing outside next to the rear driver's side door looking past the front driver's seat into the front area of the vehicle, correct?
Yes.
187. What is shown in Exhibit 187?
This is a photo of the interior of the vehicle taken from the perspective of the front passenger side.
Exhibit 188. What is shown here?
This is the front passenger side of the vehicle showing the defect in the passenger side window.
Did you more closely examine the defect in the front passenger side window?
Yes.
Did you recover any physical evidence from that interior of the window?
Yes, I did.
And what was that?
I recovered apparent hair from the interior of the defect.
Exhibit 189, Mr. Miller. What is shown here?
This is the front passenger headliner area from the perspective of the driver's side.
Okay. And that was a very clear description to me, but I've seen this image, so I want to be clear. Would it be accurate to say the perspective of this image is perhaps someone who is maybe even seated in the driver's seat or in that area of the driver's seat looking up at what I'd call like the ceiling of the vehicle above the passenger seat?
Yes, that's correct.
All right.
All right, so we're going to take a break, a 20-minute break. Okay. All right, members of the jury, 20 minutes. Okay, you may step down. All right, counsel, let's take a break.